All right. Well, hey everybody. Thanks for joining us again this week. I'm Emma Land, and today I'm joined by
Stephen Smith.
So Stephen and I are going to be talking about shame. It's a topic or an area that we see heavily in this sphere of in the world of addiction treatment, and something that, because of the nature of it, not a lot of people like to talk about or like to expose, because there is a element of an expose, I feel like, that comes with sharing what kind of shame you're experiencing or what you're experiencing shame over or about. So let's just start. Stephen, tell me a little bit about how you feel you see shame showing up in the work we do with the people here.
Sure. So, one of the first things that I try to talk about with clients is like helping them name shame when it's present. Um, Usually, we'll talk at some point about like what is shame versus guilt, which I imagine we'll probably talk about a little bit today.
Yeah.
But the thing I'm really trying to get across to clients is, um, you know, they may not immediately say I feel ashamed, but I'm going to probably try and help them name it when I see it or when I see them feeling it. And I'm also going to normalize it, and I'm going to say that like this is to some extent kind of a universal emotion.
Right.
Classically, the only people who don't feel shame are people who would be classified as like sociopaths who are incapable of experiencing that. Um, so it's something that everyone feels.
Right.
And then, really, ultimately, we're going to try to help people feel it and work through it, which, I won't go off on that tangent just yet. But yeah, where do I see it come up? It's honestly probably more easy to say where it doesn't it come.
Yeah, seriously.
Addiction, in the same way that a lot of people talk about, like, you can't really have an addiction without some level of like lying or self-lying. I think about the same thing with shame.
Yeah.
It is to a degree, I think, just like a very fundamental component of it.
Yeah.
Sometimes shame is a real driving force of what is making people turn to their addiction in the first place. It may not be the driving force, but sometimes it can just be a byproduct because of the societal stigma around addiction, the way that people may judge themselves for what they're engaging in.
Yeah.
To a degree, I just feel like it's kind of everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. It shows up like as maybe some contributing factors to developing an addiction in the midst of addiction, and then the post too, and the recovery part of it too, because shame is so secrets based, and the secrets that I keep hidden before maybe I'm using or drinking or gambling to an excessive amount can drive the need for that, because they feel so heavy. Like I have to bear this burden all by myself. Nobody else can understand what I'm going through. And then in the midst of addiction, the things I'm doing, I already feel so terrible about.
Yeah.
And it's just like this cycle where the addiction fuels the shame that was already present, and it just grows exponentially to where I feel in a deeper hole than I started in, and how am I ever going to get out of it now?
Yeah, Terry Real, one of the authors at therapist I really like, calls the shame cycle that you're describing there. He said it's like drinking salt water when you're thirsty.
Yeah.
I'm shamed, so I turn to something to try to distract myself from it or make me feel better, often in the form of addictive behavior, and then I feel even more ashamed because of it in the long run, and so on.
Yeah.
This persists.
Yeah.
One of the other things that you brought up too around like shame being a lot of like hiding and secrets, I imagine we'll probably reference, various authors and therapists throughout this talk because there are so many really, really great speakers, writers on the subject. One of actually back when I was in undergraduate, actually, I had a course that was run by a psychotherapist who was retired and teaching and practiced for like 50 years. And it was just on shame and self-respect. And the book that we read, which conveniently was his book, it was a big book, was actually titled No Place to Hide. And that is a core theme with shame. So when people experience shame, the emotion itself drives us into a hiding response.
Right.
Often, initially, we want to hide it from other people because it's a very interpersonal nature. But often, though, too, we want to hide things we're ashamed from ourselves, too.
Right.
Don't look at it. Keep it sequestered away. And, the efforts that we can go through to hide things can be many and often very destructive. And I've always found that interesting, especially in addictions work, that like regardless, people have different opinions or like degrees of affinity for 12-step programs, but I think a lot of different recovery programs, whatever one you're working, tend to really emphasize the importance of honesty.
Yeah.
And I think in large part, the honesty is is really important because it's countering a lot of the lying and the relational damage that happens in addictions. But as a byproduct, I think honesty also tends to be helping with the shame too.
Oh, yeah.
And for people who are listening, a lot of people have heard of Brene Brown and her wonderful research on shame and vulnerability.
Yeah.
And she talked about vulnerability as this antidote to shame. And I don't think they're exactly the same thing, but vulnerability and honesty are very closely tied together. So if we can help clients, even if we're not necessarily talking to them kind of in this sort of intellectual way about these topics, helping them experience and have moments of honesty and vulnerability in our sessions and in therapy sessions,
Right.
in meetings with peers who they trust, family members, that goes a long way, I think, to addressing a lot of the shame that people feel
Yeah.
surrounding addiction.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point. Vulnerability and honesty are not the same, but so similar. Vulnerability being doing something or expressing something that makes me uncomfortable. And when we're looking at active addiction, like honesty is what makes me the most uncomfortable because I've been lying for so long, because I've been keeping things hidden for so long. So by being honest, I am being vulnerable because it's so uncomfortable to do. It's uncomfortable to look your family member in the face and admit like, hey, I stole money from you, or, I hid things from you, or I used drugs in your house, or whatever it is that I am coming clean about. So they're very interwoven when it comes to recovery. Of to be honest, I have to be vulnerable, and to be vulnerable, I have to be honest. Like they're usually one and the same in the work that we see and
With peers, people. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say while we're on the subject, there are some cases where I would say that I think that honesty, not all honesty is always vulnerable, but I do think all vulnerability is honesty.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of the times they're the same. Yeah. Sometimes you think about people who, they'll be honest about something, but they leave out details. Right. What I mean? It's like there's an opportunity of the lying by omission there.
Yeah.
Or they say something that is honest, but they could have shared something more vulnerable.
Right.
Maybe there's examples I could give with that. But
Yeah.
But again, I think that those are sort of to a degree splitting hairs. When it comes to working with the folks that we work with, helping them start shifting out of that in any way possible, kind of wherever we can start is good enough.
right. Yeah.
I'm kind of been wanting to ask you this because I know you run groups talking about shame sometimes with our clients. Can you share more about what do you like to teach or impart about shame in those groups? How do you try to help clients understand the different ways it can show up in their life?
Yeah. So I feel like one of the most important things to always start with is the difference between guilt and shame, because they are just used in one and the same most of the time, but they're very different in that guilt is very adaptive. It is still, I did something wrong and I need to do something different. And that's what makes it so adaptive. It's about my behavior or the way I'm acting. Shame can turn into, unresolved guilt or things that happened to me that I didn't really have a hand in, but they now translate into who I am and not what I do. So a lot of times what I do becomes who I am because I don't know how to healthily resolve that. Those things don't have to be a reflection of me. I can do wrong and be adaptive and feel guilty, and that guilt can propel me to make amends, be honest, do something differently the next time. But let's say I do something wrong and I didn't have the modeling growing up or the opportunity to try to do better or process it or confide with others in the thing I did wrong. So now I just harbor it on as I did this wrong thing, and that thing is a reflection of me. And when I keep doing wrong things that never get resolved and just become who I am. So now to my core, I'm shame-based, I'm shame-bound, I'm this horrible person. And here's all this evidence of why I'm so horrible.
Yeah.
But guilt being, here's these things that I did wrong, but that's not me. I don't want to be that. There's this there's
Yeah.
something innate in shame and guilt of like, I don't want to be this, but the shame is I don't know how to not be, and the guilt is I want to figure out.
That's a really interesting distinction, actually. I like the way you say that. So yeah, like guilt is about the behavior, but there's sort of the separation between the thing that I did and who I am as a person.
Yeah.
Whereas the shame, there may be I did something that sparks the shame, but the shame there's no distinction. It's because I did this thing or because this thing happened to me, I am bad or I'm no good.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting way. Can you like? I almost want to just like hear you say that again. That last piece that you just said.
Yeah. So like the way that with guilt, it is a push forward to be better, to change, but it doesn't come from, oh, I'm so horrible and bad, I could never change. It comes from, I know I'm not. So I'm so bad. So I can change. I have the ability within me to change. Guilt is a healthy emotion.
Yeah.
Shame is not a healthy emotion almost all the time. John Bradshaw sometimes, and he's, a lot of his work came from back in the 90s. He talks a lot about, toxic shame versus healthy shame, but I don't think there's an amount of healthy shame. I think majority of shame is toxic. Guilt is the more healthy version of shame, if you will, because it is what can push me to change and do different and accept myself, view myself in that, like, I want to be more in alignment with my values. That action I did was not. So to live more in alignment with my values, I need to not do that action again or do it in a different way or be honest moving forward. But the shame is I am everything that I do. Like, I am no longer a human being. I'm a human doing. So every single thing I do is who I am. And when I keep doing things wrong, I am wrong. I am bad. I am not good enough. Shame keeps me stuck. Guilt keeps me moving forward. Guilt helps me change.
That is really interesting. Yeah, they're both about I don't like this or I don't want to be this way, but guilt propels us typically to some way of change out of that, and shame often is self-reinforcing and keeps us stuck in that. Even though, yeah, I think you're right that when people really feel or get to live or allow themselves to feel the shame, it really does come with that strong sense of like, I do not want to be this way. But the subtext is, and I think that I am this way, and it's wrong that I am this way. Yeah, that's very interesting. I know that with the toxic shame and healthy shame thing, I mean, it's a little inside baseball, but I mean, I think that somewhere along the way, the field of psychotherapy just sort of rebranded the terms.
Yeah.
Back in the day, yeah, healthy shame is what we now call guilt. Toxic shame, we just call shame. I think they're essentially referring to the same.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
So unpack for me a little bit more, because we've touched a little bit on like people might feel ashamed because of a thing that they did. They might feel ashamed because of a thing that happened to them. They might just feel ashamed because they feel there is something about themselves that they don't like.
Yeah.
Those are some sort of my distinctions, though. Do you offer breakdowns or different versions for clients?
Yeah. So another thing in individuals about shame, or in the group I like to run about shame, is talking about the way that it is so developmental and it is generational. So it's all starting in these micro moments from the moment we take our first breath until where we're sitting today, where things that we watch, things that we feel, things that we see, hear, impact the shame-based identity that we form. If we form maybe a more adaptive guilt way of I can feel guilty and I can change and I don't have to take it on, or if we adapt into a more shame-based. And I would say too, like we're saying, I think everybody has some sense of like a shame-based identity, feelings of shame, because societally we just come with standards and judgments and whatnot that there's always going to be something we feel shame over because someone said this one thing when I was in kindergarten and now I never do that again because I feel so stupid about it or whatever it may be. But
it's not I jump in.
Yeah.
Is there a difference for you between feelings of shame around whatever and a shame-based identity?
I would say it's probably the duration. Like if I perpetually feel shameful, but then I have more of the shame-based identity. Yeah.
Versus like, I don't know, a kid who does something wrong, and it's not this guilt, but they do feel ashamed
Yeah.
about it. But maybe enough time goes on, maybe you'd be like, maybe they talk about it and the shame kind of resolves.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I would say the identity piece too has a lot to do with how available and willing the caregivers are that are around the young child, like how much it's going to become an identity and how much it's going to be a felt sense that we all experience, but not take over to the place where I, am very suicidal, severely depressed, inactive addiction, the multitude of other disorders or issues I could face. It's going to be, can I look at you as a 3-year-old and say, I'm a bad person? And then you look at me and not like try to correct that, but understand and be there through that experience as a child. Because the one part that I think is so important, what makes shame so developmental, is where we are at that age. So for the majority of our childhood, we are self-centered. Everything is about us. It's very difficult to understand that there's a world outside of me. So when it comes to things that happen to me or things that I do, especially when it comes to things that happen to me from the people I'm around the most, typically my caregivers, it all feels like I did something to will it on. I deserved it. It's my fault. And that is what's so sticky and difficult when it comes to developing a shame-based identity, because mom and dad fight every night, and maybe, I try to go in and diffuse the situation, or I, try to get really good grades so they don't fight as often. Like I sit there and I make up, how do I fix this? Because I can fix this. I have the power to fix this, or it's about me. Like they were divorced because I was such a bad kid. Or when it comes to even abusive situations, they hit me because I acted out in class, or I spoke out of turn, or I. It's all because of me. So when it comes to the way I develop shame because of what happened to me, it's usually going to be in those more developmental earlier years of everything feels like it's my fault or about me. So these horrible things that happen in my life, I willed them on. It's all my fault. And I'll just carry that perpetual, it's all my fault. It's, I mess everything up. I'm a bad person. I'm not good enough for years and years to come.
Sure. Yeah, I think, well, it's definitely, I mean, you're definitely spot on that. I think that like the self-centered nature of like childhood, I have done on the feed, Billy and I have done a lot of podcasts talking about ACA. And so we talk a lot about childhood. And I may even have shared this in one of those podcasts, but there's a child psychiatrist, Frank Anderson, I think is his name. And he has a line that I really like that says, children will take responsibility for things that adults don't 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, I mean, there's like, developmental psychologists, with the developmental milestones, like at what age ranges generally children typically develop certain like cognitive capacities. I think it's around the like 8 to 10 range. Is when children develop the ability to perspective take and basically imagine the world from another person's view, which if you're going to have things like empathy, if you're going to be able to speculate, as a person, why might this person have been doing it?
Right.
If you're a 6-year-old, for the most part, kids like really don't even have that skill. Yeah. So naturally, of course, they're going to think from their perspective. And, I'll bring in a little bit of my EMDR background here too, but so someone may experience something way later in their life, like maybe I don't really develop an addiction until my 20s, say. And then a lot of things happen, or I do a lot of things, and I may still develop a lot of shame and this belief of it's my fault, or this is because I'm a bad person. And even though I'm a 20-year-old, and yes, I do have the ability to perspective take, at least from some of the theory underlying EMDR, it's like if someone has a lot of shame-based experiences or memories, or even like beliefs about themselves, even if they had nothing to do with the concept of addiction, someone, when they engage in behavior that they believe to be wrong, may be sort of more predisposed to jump into feelings of shame as opposed to guilt, right? Maybe in part because of like the shame-based identity stuff you're talking about.
Yeah. And too, I think it's important to note that like the smallest interactions in childhood that aren't even necessarily wrong or bad can
Still be interpreted.
perpetuate, yeah, like a potential shame-based identity or shame feeling. Like an example I always give is like, and there's nothing wrong in this example, is like when you're a child and you fall down and you scrape your knee, usually a parent's common reaction is like, oh, you're okay, get up, shake it off. Like, and if maybe you're crying, oh, don't cry, it's okay. And like, that is a very loving way to approach your child who just got hurt. But as children, because we're sponges when we're so little, we're trying to interpret, how do I interact with the world? So when I hurt and I get the just primal urge to cry because I'm bleeding, and then this person who loves me, cares for me, is right there saying, don't cry, that's so confusing for a kid because my body is telling me, cry, you hurt, like you're not okay right now. But then this person who I really trust is saying, don't cry. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it starts this lack of trust in self. And shame is lack of trust in self too, of I can't trust that I can do good things. I can't trust that I can change. I can't trust that I can show up. And it's those I call them micro moments, because that in the grand scheme of thing, I'm sure like you can't even remember if that happened when you were 3 or 4. Well, maybe it did. And it's that micro moment as they keep going. And then maybe some larger moments that are going to be just more bring on shame feelings in general can shape to where I get this place that I don't trust myself and I'm shame bound and I don't think I can change. It can't come from me. So let me look to drugs, alcohol, gambling. Let me look to the external to fix me, because if internal is so bad and so wrong, how could I ever fix it?
That's a really interesting shame being a lack of trust in self.
Mm-hmm.
In the course that I took that my professor taught, he would talk about how like shame is this he would call like an alienating or disconnecting emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So when we experience shame, it first sort of disconnects us or isolates us from other people because we go to the efforts to hide. And then he would say, often though, the longer that the shame sticks around, it becomes alienation from ourselves. Mm-hmm. So we want to disown parts of ourselves. But I imagine somewhere in there, a lack of trust in myself probably figures in too. Yeah, I definitely want to add while we're talking about like the developmental piece of this. I mean, I don't know if anyone listening would, interpret it this way. But yeah, I don't think about this when I talk about this with clients, especially if they're clients who maybe have kids of their own, to make it seem as if, parents need to be hyper sensitive or fearful of, will I say the wrong thing and create shame?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the answer to that is like, there's so much that happens in our day-to-day lives, whether it's with parents or at school. I mean, think about just like the playground at school.
Yeah.
So many of these can invoke an emotion of shame. And again, that's a normal emotion that humans have. I think about like a place where if people for themselves or in their relationships with other people want to think about how they can like not further cause shame, to think more about like how they can foster like repair, like conversations and processing of the shame. Whether you're a parent or like I said, whether you're trying to think about this for yourself, like how can I focus on providing context and reassurance and maybe some self-compassion, allow myself to feel those things instead of suppress them. That would be where I would want to help clients put the focus, rather than I need to be so afraid that I'm going to do the wrong thing and cause shame.
Yeah, right. Because it, like you said, it is a very normal human experience to feel shame at some level. It's problematic when it becomes a toxic identity. I become wrapped up in a straitjacket basically of shame. And that's where, it comes down to being available and willing, like kind of what I was saying earlier. There are going to be moments that make children or anyone feel some type of shame. And Gabramate had this, I listened to this podcast recently that I was like, oh my gosh, this is so applicable to shame too. He was talking about trauma and how the experience itself, yes, is traumatic. And he was talking mainly about childhood trauma. And he was talking about the difference between if someone can heal from that trauma after it occurs and if it becomes maybe more like a complex PTSD diagnosis, is in could they go to someone about it? So I want to say he was maybe with Mel Robbins on the podcast, and they were talking about she had been sexually abused as a child. And he asked, well, who did you talk to about it? And she didn't have anyone. And they were exploring how like the event itself was traumatic, but the ability to heal from the traumatic event comes with, can I go to someone? Can I have someone, be there, empathetic, understand, process, or do I bottle it up and hold it in and it's all mine? And that's shame too, is bottling it up and holding it in and it's all mine.
Yeah.
And where traumatic experiences breed that shame and contribute to a lot of the symptoms that do come with PTSD or PTSD or depression is I can't talk to anybody. I
Sure.
just keep it to myself.
Yeah, which is why I mean, kind of back to where we started. Like, I mean, how like do we work with shame here? How like people were, trying to get into recovery, think about it. I mean, it really does sound very basic, I think, and but like to a trusted and safe person,
Yeah.
which that can be a hard thing in and of itself for people to find or know what that's like, depending on their current social circle and family support. But to find or create relationships like that and then talk to people about it. And it doesn't have to be like all at once necessarily. But that's part of what therapy, what recovery meetings are there for too. Right. Other stuff happens in those and there's other stuff I think that's maybe more nuanced about working through shame. But at the most basic level, I think that's where people really need to start.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of bravery and a lot of courage. Despite being a universal emotion, I think it's also a pretty universal experience that like is hard. People don't like to talk about it. And the other thing I run into a lot in my work, and I mean honestly, I don't even have to just say with people I work with, it's just people.
Yeah.
Is that like we're not always the best judges of whether we are or are not ashamed of something.
Yes.
It's very common that we are not completely tapped into our level of feelings on that. And I think part of that is because like we were saying, like shame is like, it has this hide response. Don't show it, shove it away, whatever we want to call it. It can be kind of hidden from ourselves.
Yeah.
And so, whether this is myself saying this to myself or a client that I'm working with, if I hear someone say, oh yeah, I was ashamed about that, but I kind of worked through it or I've processed that. Sometimes that's true, but I don't automatically trust that. Yeah. And it's not because I think people are lying to me. Like I said, I think it's just, we're not always the best judges of the level of feelings that are actually there because by natural response, the instinct is to bury it.
Yeah.
So, if people are thinking like, oh, I think I worked through a lot of my shame. I'm not sitting here telling you, oh, that's definitely not true. But I just say like, be curious about it. I mean, and I think that's another reason why talking to other people like a therapist, a sponsor in recovery meetings can be helpful is because other times I think other people can see better than we can if we're still harboring feelings like that.
Yeah, especially because there's so many cover-ups for shame that it doesn't always look like shame. So, oh, I'm not ashamed of that. I may exude a level of confidence or grandeur or perfectionism, or I can get everything done. I'm high achieving. I'm successful. I love this part. John Bradshaw, in one of the seminars he gave about his book, Healing the Shame That Binds You, he talks about himself because he had a lot of experiences with shame and addiction. And he talks about, he was one of the most high achieving kids in the school. He was president of, this club and captain of the football team and doing all these things. And his principal looked at him and said he was so sick and sick mentally, like just not doing well. And he kind of talks about it as like, whose principal would look at one of the most successful kids in the school and say, you're sick and you don't even know it. And I think that is the perfect picture of we might not even be able to tell that we're shame bound because it doesn't feel good. So I pick something to cover it up, to get rid of it in the same way that I use drugs, drink, gamble. But so we become such masters at having a shame-based identity that I don't really have the conscious streamline of thoughts anymore of like, I'm such a bad person, I'm a loser, I'm not good enough. It's so subconscious that I don't think those thoughts probably every day. So of course I don't think I'm shame-based. Yeah. It takes this deep digging to get that out. And when it comes out, it feels so overwhelming because it's also the thing I've been afraid of for so long is I'm going to fall apart and then I can't put it back together.
Yeah.
Because that's the innate belief in shame. I can't fix it. So when it actually comes to the surface and it's a lot of emotion, it can be, disguised as anger. It can be just a lot of crying or tendency to want to isolate or self-sabotage, but it feels so overwhelming. And I'm so terrified that my worst fear is going to be confirmed that I just broke myself and I can't put it back together.
Yeah. Which is why, I think sometimes in therapy sessions, we'll tell people or ask them like just to sit with something. And shame, I think, is really important. There's phenomenal, wonderful research and work being done on self-compassion. And that all of that stuff is really good. But I think people who just look at that from the outside assume that that's just the natural antidote to shame. And I think eventually, when we can get there, that's what we want to do. But we can't, when we start, like, we can't go to, oh, I'm recognizing there is shame, straight to, now I need to fix it with all this other stuff. Because all of the other things that we've been doing, like you said, whether that's the addictive behaviors themselves, perfectionism, striving for success, you name it. All those other behaviors that are the cover-ups so that we don't have to feel ashamed.
Right.
That's what we've been using to run from it. So like healing from it involves a degree of sitting with it.
Yeah.
Which, I can't tell you how many clients, I've experienced this myself. And like, when I'd be like, what does that mean to sit with it? How's that really going to help? Like, what do you mean I'm just supposed to sit with it? It feels counterintuitive and it often feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's just part of the process. Because otherwise, I think if we just sort of jump to the fix, sometimes the levels of shame decrease a little bit. I'm not going to say that doesn't do anything for it, but the people who say, I think I've moved past that, but haven't really moved past it, really fully processed it, I think usually haven't done enough of the actual feeling, sitting with, staying with, vulnerability work. And yeah, I think about, even as I'm describing this, like if, myself as an 18-year-old had heard me say this, I think I would have been like, that's so unsatisfying. Yeah, that's not helpful. Like, I don't understand how I'm supposed to do that. Which, I can acknowledge, but that's why we work with other people when we're trying to get through it, because they can help us with the process.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the way, this is like a great way to kind of wrap this episode up, but that John Bradshaw describes that part where we don't just need to flee into action, because the doing is also what got us here in the first place, when all we focused on was what we do.
Yeah.
So we don't need to skip that. We like to just feel as bad as we do and it be okay. We feel okay with it. And maybe it's someone else telling us it's okay, because we don't want to stress ourselves. Yeah, that it's just feeling as bad as you do. You don't have to get rid of being sad, angry, lonely, feeling grief, whatever it is. It's just letting it be there and it be what it is. And that's all on a self-compassion note. I love to simplify self-compassion into just being space. It's just space to be and to feel. And that's what the beginning of healing my shame looks like, is just actually feeling it and allowing it to be there.
Yeah. So, hopefully, people will take something away from this, whether you, I think are still feeling shame, or whether you don't feel it, but you go to meetings and you see a therapist, take another look.
Yeah.
Is it present in my life? I think the answer for most people on this planet is, yeah, it's probably present somewhere in our lives.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and join us next week.